Adam Brundage was a 26-year-old father of two, living in Quakertown, Pennsylvania. He was an avid reader who loved his two cats. In early October of 2004, he abruptly disappeared. The last confirmed sighting of him was at his workplace, an organic food warehouse in Milford Township, Pennsylvania, on October 1st. He was reported missing several days later to police by his ex-girlfriend, who was the mother of his children. She told them that while Adam generally liked to stay home and keep to himself when he was not at work, it was unusual for him to be out of contact with her. Unable to get a hold of him by phone, she had also gone to his home to check on him, but he had not been there. The usually reliable employee had also begun missing shifts at work. Quakertown police investigated Adam's disappearance, but they ran out of leads to follow by the end of November. The case remained unsolved until January of 2020. On January 21st, Bucks County District Attorney Matthew Weintraub held a press conference to announce that Adam's case was solved. Unfortunately, Adam had gone missing because he had been killed in October of 2004. Authorities had located his remains, and his killer had already been arraigned in the case earlier that morning. Adam had been killed by someone who had been under suspicion ever since he went missing, his roommate, Damon Smoot. Adam had purchased the townhome he lived in using money he had inherited following his father's death, and had taken Smoot in as a roommate to offset the costs of home ownership. According to DA Weintraub, Smoot was jealous of Adam's possessions and essentially took over his life after killing him. After Adam went missing, Smoot continued living in Adam's house. He also began using all of Adam's belongings and driving Adam's maroon 1997 Mercury Cougar, which had been his prized possession. Smoot told Adam's stepmother that Adam had given him the house, the car, and his belongings, but could never provide any evidence or legal documents supporting this. He also gave various excuses for Adam's absence, saying that he was in states ranging from Wisconsin to West Virginia, for reasons ranging from needing cancer treatment to being in rehab, to having a new job, to running away from paying child support. In April of 2019, Adam's case was reopened, and authorities eventually found evidence, which has not been publicly specified, tying Smoot to his disappearance. On January 9, 2020, prosecutors met with Smoot and his attorney in prison, where Smoot was serving a 5 to 10-year sentence for an unrelated assault, to confront him with this evidence. At that time, Smoot, in the words of his attorney, chose to unburden his soul and confess to Adam's murder. In 2004, Smoot had been working as a heavy machine operator at the Haynes and Kibble House Quarry in Chalfont, Pennsylvania. Adam needed some sand to fix a grading issue on his property, and Smoot told him to meet him at the quarry after hours to buy some on October 4th. After Adam arrived at the quarry, the two men got into an argument. Smoot retrieved a baseball bat from his vehicle and used it to hit Adam in the back of the head with enough force to cave in his skull. This did not kill Adam immediately, however, so Smoot used his hands to cover Adam's nose and mouth until he stopped breathing. He then buried Adam's body in a berm in the quarry. Smoot provided authorities with the exact location where he had placed Adam's body in the quarry. Even with this specific information and the help of a cadaver dog, it took a full day and night of excavating to remove all of the rock covering Adam's remains and recover them. If Smoot had not chosen to cooperate, Adam may never have been found, both because of how deeply he was buried and because investigators believed that Smoot had disposed of Adam somewhere on several acres of farmland he had access to, and were planning on focusing their searches for Adam there instead of at the quarry. On January 21st, the morning of the press conference, Smoot was arraigned on one count of criminal homicide at the Bucks County Courthouse. He waived his right to a preliminary hearing, and his bail was set at $1 million. Smoot's lawyers and the district attorney's office have reached an agreement, which has been approved by Adam's family, in which Smoot will plead guilty to third-degree murder and receive a sentence of 20 to 40 years in prison. 57-year-old Naomi Sanders lived alone in apartment 12 of the Oakwood Gardens apartments in Vallejo, California. On February 26, 1973, she spoke on the phone with one of her friends at 8:30 p.m. She mentioned that she was about to cook her dinner. After hanging up the phone, she began cooking 2 steaks. It is believed that one was for her own dinner, and the other was being prepared for her pet poodle Cindy. The steaks would still be on the stove, only half cooked, when another resident of the apartment complex entered Naomi's apartment the following day, around 5 p.m. The neighbor found Naomi's partially nude body on her bed. Cindy the poodle was standing guard over her owner. Naomi's autopsy would later reveal that she had been raped and strangled. Naomi had no known enemies or scorned former boyfriends for police to investigate. She had been employed by the Brooks Security Service for 2 years, leaving her position there just 2 months before her death. Her former supervisor there, a retired police detective, volunteered to help with the investigation, but also said that Naomi had not received any threats while working for him. Naomi had left her job at Brooks after 6 months of trying to balance it with her second job. She worked as the building manager for her apartment complex, and had a large cardboard sign with the word "open" written on it in her front window to inform passers-by that there were apartments available in the complex, and that she was available to discuss them. Potential new tenants would routinely come speak with Naomi about the complex, meaning her killer could have feigned interest in living at Oakwood Gardens as a means of getting inside her apartment. Naomi's case went cold, and several decades would pass before authorities found new avenues of investigation. In 2014, Naomi's clothes were resubmitted to the California Department of Justice Laboratory for testing. These tests revealed semen stains, from which a DNA profile was developed. Unfortunately, there was no match to the profile in the CODIS database. In 2016, police tried to use familial DNA to identify Naomi's killer. They compared the DNA profile from the crime scene to offender databases first in California and later nationwide, to see if a relative of the contributor of the DNA had committed a crime and therefore had their DNA profile on file. They did not find any such relatives. In 2018, detectives turned their attention to using genetic genealogy to solve the case. While they could not identify any relatives of the killer in offender databases, they still hoped that they could locate some in public genealogical databases. They partnered with Parabon Nanolabs. An analysis completed in April of 2019 identified 2 potential suspects. Detectives traveled to Louisiana, where they covertly obtained a DNA sample from one of these potential suspects from an item they observed him throwing away. Testing on this sample eliminated him as a suspect. Their other potential suspect was deceased, and his remains had been cremated, leaving authorities without the opportunity to test his DNA directly. This man did have children, however. They visited one of his sons, who lives outside of California, and he provided them with a sample of his DNA. On February 27, 2020, exactly 47 years after Naomi's body was discovered, the Vallejo Police Department announced that they had identified her killer, Robert Dale Edwards. Edwards was 22 years old and living in Vallejo at the time of Naomi's murder. His father was a previous co-worker of hers. He could not be arrested for the crime because he had passed away from a drug overdose in Napa County, California, in 1993. He had spent the 2 decades between Naomi's murder and his own death building an extensive criminal record, with charges ranging from assault to driving under the influence to attempted murder. Edwards was identified through his niece, 26-year-old Sophia Edwards, who had uploaded her DNA to the GEDmatch database. The young mother and in-home care provider, living in Napa, California, barely knew her father, and was using the database to try to find out more about her family. The amount of DNA she shared with the profile generated from Naomi's clothing allowed investigators to focus in on her family tree. While Sophia never met her uncle, she did have old pictures of him, and was shocked to see his face on the evening news, following his identification as Naomi's killer. Edward's son, who provided his DNA to police in order to confirm his father's involvement in Naomi's case, has not been publicly identified. His half-brother, however, has spoken publicly about the case. Robert Edwards is a 42-year-old married father who lives in Fairfield, California. He does not know his half-brother, who provided his DNA to police, and he did not know his father. His mother left his father when he was just a few months old because of his violent behavior, which she had viewed as a reaction to the time he had spent serving in the Vietnam War. While the younger Robert Edwards knew his father was not a good man, he was still shocked to learn of his involvement in Naomi's case. All this was shocking to me. I knew my dad was not a nice man after the war, but never thought he was a murderer or rapist, he told the Daily News. Naomi had no children of her own, but, having 9 brothers and sisters, she has a large extended family. Following the announcement of the identification of Robert Dale Edwards as her killer, 2 of Naomi's nieces released a statement on behalf of their family. Many family members directly affected by the loss of Naomi have also passed, and unfortunately, they cannot be afforded the truth as to what happened, they wrote. Those of us who do remember the stories of Naomi's life and untimely death can now feel closure thanks to the determination and teamwork of the Vallejo Police Department and partnering law enforcement agencies. May Naomi now rest in peace. In 1992, 57-year-old James Essel was a beloved father and a small business owner. He owned the Sugarloaf Mountain Market, a convenience store in Comus, Maryland. In the early morning hours of March 22, 1992, a customer discovered James's body inside of his store. He had been hit over the head and stabbed 29 times. What little money had been in the store's cash register had been taken. James had apparently fought fiercely for his life, as blood from his assailant was left behind at the scene. The blood was the only real clue investigators had to work with. Comus was small, rural, and close-knit. The robbery was unusual for the community, and the murder was almost unthinkable. James had only owned his store for less than 2 years, but was already a fixture in the community, which rallied around his memory and his family. Unfortunately, James's case quickly went cold, and the town of Comus and James's family spent year after year without answers. In 2017, however, police were able to use new developments in DNA technology to generate a new lead in the case. They contacted Parabon Nanolabs, who used their snapshot DNA analysis service to generate images of the individual whose blood was left behind at the scene, one showing him as a young man, and another of what he may look like having aged 30 years. These images were released to the public, but did not result in an arrest in the case. Authorities then turned to genetic genealogy to help identify James's killer. Using public genealogy databases, they were able to identify relatives of the perpetrator, and eventually identified a potential suspect in late January of 2020. That suspect was 51-year-old Hans Hewitts, who was living in Virginia Beach. On February 10, 2020, investigators obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Hewitts. On February 11th, they obtained the DNA sample from him. When asked about the case, Hewitts only acknowledged once getting into a fight with someone many years before, but he was unaware that the other man had died. The DNA from the cheek swab taken from Hans Hewitts was quickly processed. It was a match to the blood left behind at the crime scene. On February 12, 2020, detectives from the Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland, in conjunction with the U.S. Marshals, went to arrest Hewitts on charges of first-degree murder, felony murder, and robbery with a dangerous weapon. Authorities went to Hewitts' home on Maitland Drive, where they found him inside of his car. When they tried to arrest him, Hewitts pulled a gun. A neighbor was recording the brief police standoff from down the street, and on the video, police can be heard telling Hewitts several times to put down his weapon. He did not. Hewitts was then shot and killed. The exact details of the moments before the police decided to fire, and their reason for doing so, have not been released, as there has to be an official investigation into the incident. The detectives involved in the shooting have been placed on administrative leave until the investigation is completed, as is standard procedure. Hewitts' wife, Haiti, is a private investigator and retired Washington, D.C. police officer. The couple had only been married for 6 years, but had known each other since they were children. Haiti does not believe that her husband, who did not have a criminal record, committed the crime, and has stated that she will be working to clear her husband's name. James Essel's family, however, does accept the results of the investigation and the answers they have provided. "I wish the guy could have served time for the crime, but it's just a relief," James's daughter, Perpetua Edwards, said. "To know that it's over is a huge relief for me and my siblings."